All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today we're going all the way back to 1977, to the origins of Star Wars.
Yeah, the original, the one that started it all.
Exactly. And we've got some amazing sources to help us uncover how this film went from a risky idea to, well, Star Wars. We've got a book that dives into its cultural impact, some actual production documents from the time, and even a YouTube retrospective that covers the whole original trilogy. But we're not just after fun facts here.
No, we're going deeper.
Much deeper. We want to understand the decisions, the struggles, the sheer grit that went into making Star Wars the phenomenon it became.
It's funny, isn't it? We tend to think of Star Wars as this instant success story.
Yeah, like it just exploded onto the scene.
Right. But the reality is way more interesting, way more human. It's a story of almost failures, creative clashes, and honestly a good dose of luck.
So picture this. 1977, San Francisco.
The birthplace of Star Wars.
The place where it all began. And the world is, well, kind of bleak.
Yeah, not exactly a time of sunshine and rainbows.
Our book paints a vivid picture of this. Economic downturn, people are cynical after Watergate, the Vietnam War is still a heavy shadow. I even looked up the San Francisco Chronicle from May 25th, 1977, the day Star Wars had its very quiet debut.
Quiet? Really?
Yeah, no big premiere, just a small release. The Chronicle itself is full of news about plane explosions, terrorist attacks, even Nixon giving these rambling interviews. And tucked away on page 51, a tiny review titled, Star Wars, Magic Ride.
Wow. Buried in the back.
Right, talk about a contrast to the front page doom and gloom.
It makes you wonder if anyone even noticed it back then.
Oh, but someone did. The reviewer, John Wasserman, he saw something special. He talked about the incredible visuals, the pure excitement of it. He even promised to eat his words if it wasn't the most thrilling movie of the year.
Talk about a bold prediction.
Can you imagine reading that review back then, surrounded by all that bad news? It's like this little beacon of hope, a promise of escape, right when the world needed it most.
And maybe that's part of why Star Wars became so huge. It offered people this chance to escape into a world of adventure, heroism, to feel something good when things felt, well, not so good.
Okay, so let's actually step into that world, into the film itself. Think about that opening, that iconic yellow logo zooming toward the stars.
Instantly recognizable.
Everyone knows it. But here's something most people don't know. It started as a simple theater brochure design.
No way.
Yeah. A 22-year-old art director, Susie Rice, she'd just finished working at Rolling Stone, comes up with this logo.
So not even for the film itself?
Not at first. And get this, Lucas, he wanted a very fascist look for the logo.
Fascist?
Something that could rival AT&T.
Interesting direction.
Right. But he sees Rice's design and he's blown away. This logo that was meant for a brochure ends up on the film almost by accident. A happy accident that shaped cinematic history.
Love that. Speaking of design choices, what about that opening crawl?
Ah, the legendary crawl. That wasn't always so sleek and iconic. Lucas's front version was, well, a bit wordy.
Wordy how?
We're talking 6 paragraphs of dense text, packed with backstory that didn't even really serve the story.
Yikes, that's a lot of text to crawl across the screen.
Then, out of nowhere, Brian De Palma gets involved. The director of Scarface, Carrie.
That's not who I'd picture working on a Star Wars opening crawl.
Right. Talk about an unexpected collaborator. Our book actually shows his edits. He takes this wall of text and transforms it into those iconic 4 sentences. He cuts out the fluff, focuses on the essential info, delivers it with punch.
It's like a masterclass in concise writing. He turned an info dump into an invitation into this amazing universe.
Exactly. Okay, now let's talk about a moment that grabs you right from the start. Darth Vader's entrance.
Chills. Every time.
Our book tells the story about a kid, Philip Fearlinger, who was 7 years old when his dad dragged him to Star Wars.
Oh no, poor kid.
He was apparently bored out of his mind until Vader appears, and then, boom, he was hooked. It just shows you how instantly captivating that character is.
It's Vader's presence, right? That imposing figure, that breathing, the voice that just oozes power. But what people often forget is how many people came together to create him.
It was a team effort.
Totally. You've got Lucas's initial concept, Ralph McQuarrie's visual design, Ben Burtt creating that chilling breathing sound, and of course the voice itself.
The Darth Farmer versus James Earl Jones debate.
Yes. We all know how iconic Jones's voice is for Vader, but Lucas wasn't convinced at first. What changed his mind?
It seems it was the casting director, Fred Roos, who really pushed for Jones. He believed Jones had this gravitas, this menace in his voice that was perfect for Vader. Lucas, though hesitant, eventually came around. And the rest, as they say, is history.
It makes you wonder, would Vader have had the same impact without Jones? It shows how sometimes the most iconic things come from unexpected places, from trusting your team, from taking those creative risks.
And it shows the power of sound in building a truly memorable character. It's not just about what you see, it's about what you hear.
Absolutely. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Part of what makes Star Wars so great is what it doesn't explain.
Right.
It leaves these gaps, these unanswered questions that let us, the viewers, use our imaginations.
You're right. Think about that line, the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. It's purposely ambiguous. Parsecs are distance, not time. But instead of explaining it away, Lucas just leaves it hanging.
And that sparks debate, fan theories. It keeps people thinking about the story long after the credits roll.
Exactly. And that sense of mystery, of a world bigger than what we see on screen, that's what pulls us in.
It makes it feel real, lived in.
Right. Compare that to, say, the Ellen Dean Foster novelization of Star Wars. It tried to explain everything and, I think, lost some of that magic.
Sometimes less is more, especially when you're building a world you want people to explore. But let's be real, creating a world as detailed and complex as Star Wars. It wasn't all smooth sailing.
Definitely not. Our YouTube documentary goes behind the scenes, and it turns out making this groundbreaking film was a bit of a grueling experience.
I bet there were some stories there.
Oh, yeah. They started filming in Tunisia, and right away they're battling the elements. Torrential rain, equipment malfunctions, crazy heat.
Ironically, those iconic desert scenes were plagued by the worst rainstorm in 50 years.
You got to admire their dedication, though, right? To push through all that and create something visually stunning. But it wasn't just the weather. There was a lot of doubt on set.
Really? From who?
Crew members, some actors. They found the concept weird, the dialogue a bit cheesy. No one knew they were making a phenomenon.
I guess it's hard to see the bigger picture when you're in the middle of the chaos.
It was a different kind of film, and its success wasn't guaranteed. It took a leap of faith to believe in Lucas's vision, and even he struggled. The documentary mentions that he was hospitalized for hypertension and exhaustion.
Wow, the pressure must have been immense.
He was pushing himself, risking everything. And speaking of risks, we can't talk about Star Wars without mentioning ILM.
Industrial Light and Magic, Lucas's own visual effects company.
Born out of necessity, right. Existing studios couldn't handle the effects he wanted.
They were pioneers, developing techniques that would change filmmaking forever.
Like motion control. They built custom cameras that could repeat movements perfectly, allowing them to create those seamless shots with spaceships and effects.
I can't imagine how groundbreaking that was back then.
Oh, absolutely. But it wasn't easy for ILM. The documentary talks about how they blew a huge chunk of their budget on building that motion control rig. And for a while, they only had 2 finished shots to show for it.
Talk about a gamble.
Right. But they stuck with it. And in doing so, they didn't just create the effects for Star Wars, they raised the bar for what was possible in cinema.
It shows what can happen when you take risks and invest in innovation, even when things are uncertain. Okay, so we've talked about production challenges. Now, imagine trying to market a space opera in 1977.
Not exactly a genre known for blockbusters.
Exactly. Those early trailers and posters were surprisingly minimalist. They focused on taglines like, "Coming to your galaxy this summer." Not much about the actual plot.
They played with expectations, created a sense of mystery instead of revealing everything. But even with that, getting people into theaters was tough.
How tough.
Less than 40 theaters agreed to show it at first. The film that would become the highest-grossing film of all time almost didn't find an audience. Fox, the studio, had to bundle Star Wars with another film, The Other Side of Midnight, just to get a screen time.
Can you imagine those early viewers seeing those first moments on screen? What must they have thought?
That's a great question, and it leads us to the heart of what made Star Wars a phenomenon. Because while its success wasn't a sure thing, once those initial screenings started, something magical happened.
It took hold, didn't it? It wasn't just the marketing, the release, it was the film itself. It just clicked with people.
It's funny, though, because it almost didn't happen. Our YouTube retrospective goes into the script's evolution, and those early drafts, they were so different.
Really? How so?
Well, for one, Han Solo was almost a green-skinned alien.
Whoa, that's wild.
And Luke Skywalker was almost Luke Starkiller.
Starkiller. A bit on the nose, don't you think?
Yeah, even for a galaxy far, far away. And get this, Princess Leia. She almost didn't exist.
No, Leia. No way.
It's crazy to think how different it could have been. What made Lucas change those things?
Well, the retrospective mentions this one scene that was actually filmed but cut. It had Luke and his friends talking about the Empire's politics, Biggs coming back from the Academy saying he's joining the rebellion.
I remember reading about that. It was like 5 minutes long, so much talking. It didn't fit the film's energy at all.
Lucas filmed it because his friend said it added context, made things more human, but he realized it just slowed everything down. It must have been tough to cut something so personal, but it was the right call.
Sometimes you have to kill your darlings, right? Especially when it comes to exposition.
Mm-hmm.
Trust the audience to fill in some blanks, and you get a more engaging experience.
Makes sense. And that idea, trusting the audience, it went beyond the story, the production design too. Lucas created this detailed world, but he kept the action moving. He didn't want lingering shots on sets or costumes.
The retrospective quotes him saying he didn't want people to admire the scenery. He wanted the film to be this constant rush.
That's interesting. I wonder, did that have anything to do with his feelings about the special effects?
Maybe. He felt they weren't quite as good as, say, 2001, A Space Odyssey. So he might have cut away quickly to hide any flaws.
It's funny because those effects were revolutionary at the time. Even now, they hold up pretty well. But it shows that even the greats have doubts. What matters is how they turn those doubts into something that pushes the boundaries.
Absolutely. Okay, but let's talk characters. We touch on how they evolved, but what brings them to life are the performances, the little things that make them feel real.
Like casting Harrison Ford as Han Solo.
A stroke of genius.
Right. Lucas was hesitant at first, but Ford's charm, that wit, it added so much.
And Carrie Fisher as Leia. She brought such strength, intelligence, she completely changed what a princess could be.
A fighter, a leader. And her chemistry with both Ford and Hamill was fantastic.
They felt like a real team. And how can we forget the droids, C-3PO and R2-D2? They're some of the most lovable characters.
It's amazing how much personality they have, considering they're, well, droids. It's a testament to puppeteers and sound designers.
You're totally right. We get emotionally invested in a beeping trash can and a fussy protocol droid.
Exactly. And the voices, Anthony Daniels as C-3PO, Kenny Baker doing R2-D2's sounds, those are iconic.
It shows how voice acting is just as powerful as any live-action performance.
Oh, and get this. Daniels wasn't even Lucas's first choice for C-3PO.
No way.
But he'd been on set every day in the costume, had this rapport with the other actors. Lucas realized he was perfect for the role.
Another happy accident.
It's like the film was making itself. All these little decisions, moments of chance coming together to make something special.
And the editors, they played a huge role too. They took all that footage and turned it into a cohesive story. They weren't focused on strict continuity.
More on rhythm, momentum, creating a flow that keeps you hooked.
It's like they were composing music, finding the right tempo for each scene.
Speaking of music, John Williams, that score is just iconic.
It's Star Wars. You can't imagine the film without it. It adds so much grandeur, emotion. It's like another character in the story.
And it was a bold move back then. Disco was huge, but they went with this orchestral score. It was a risk that paid off big time.
It shows the power of trusting your gut, going against the trends to create something truly unique.
And don't forget Ben Burtt's sound design. He came up with all these new sounds, blasters, lightsabers, Chewbacca. It brought the world to life in a way no one had heard before.
He used everyday objects in such creative ways, like the lightsaber hum. It's a projector motor mixed with TV feedback.
It's amazing how much ingenuity went into every part of this film. When you have limitations, sometimes that's when the best innovations happen.
Totally. But even with all that, the effects, the characters, the music, Star Wars still had to win over audiences. It was a space opera, not exactly a recipe for success back then.
It's all about word of mouth. Those early viewers, they became the film's biggest supporters. They told their friends, the buzz grew, lines at theaters, sold out screenings, and suddenly this small film becomes a cultural phenomenon.
A true underdog story, a film that defied expectations, overcame obstacles, and in the end captured the hearts of millions. And it didn't stop there, did it? The little spark became this wildfire.
More than a wildfire, it was like planting a seed that grew into this whole universe.
That's what's so wild about Star Wars. It wasn't just a movie. It was the start of, well, everything.
A whole mythology just waiting to be explored. Our sources actually say that even while writing the first film, Lucas already had this bigger story in mind.
You did? Like what kind of story?
This huge saga, the rise and fall of Darth Vader, the mysteries of the Force, good versus evil, but spanning over multiple films?
So it wasn't just one movie. He was building a world from the start. That's incredibly ambitious.
It really is. And if you look at those early drafts, you can see hints of it. There are elements, characters that weren't in the final film, but they pop up later.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, think about the Clone Wars. It's barely mentioned in the original,
It's
right?
just a quick line.
But then boom, it's in novels, comics, even its own prequel trilogy. Those ideas were already there in Lucas's head back in the 70s.
He was playing the long game, building a universe with history, politics, everything. He wanted it to feel real, a place you could lose yourself in.
Absolutely. He planted those seeds knowing they could grow into something massive. And of course, the success of Star Wars gave him the power to do just that. He wasn't just a director anymore, he was this architect of a whole world.
A myth maker. So when did he start thinking about sequels?
Pretty much right away. Even before the first one came out, he was brainstorming. He knew the story wasn't over.
But what if the first film hadn't been a hit? What then?
Well, our book actually mentions this. Lucas had a backup plan. A smaller, cheaper sequel that eventually became a novel called Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Whoa, a totally different direction. Imagine how things might have turned out. But obviously that didn't happen. Star Wars was huge, and Lucas got to go big with the sequel. He brought in screenwriter Lee Brackett to help.
And together, they started crafting The Empire Strikes Back, a darker chapter more focused on the characters. It really expanded the world.
And sadly, Brackett passed away before they finished.
It's so true, but her touch is all over the film. The dialogue is sharper, more emotional than in the first one.
Lucas made sure she got full credit too, which is great. Then he brought in Lawrence Kasdan to help finish it.
And they created what many consider to be one of the best sequels ever made.
For sure. Empire is so ambitious. New characters, planets, ships, and it goes deeper into the Force, into Darth Vader, and that ending. Talk about a cliffhanger.
It kept everyone guessing, and it did all that while feeling like a true Star Wars film, not just a rehash. It built on what came before.
It's the power of collaboration, right? Bringing in talented people who can add to the vision.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the director, Irvin Kershner. He brought this emotional depth to Empire that really worked.
His background was in smaller, character-driven films. So he really focused on those relationships, on showing their strengths and weaknesses.
It's like he provided this close-up on the characters while Lucas kept that wide shot, that epic scope. They complemented each other perfectly.
And then there's that twist. I am your father. No one saw that coming. It changed everything.
Pure genius. It flipped the whole story on its head, and it made Darth Vader even more complex, more iconic.
And it left everyone wanting more. Luckily, the final chapter, Return of the Jedi, was already being made. Lucas was back directing too.
He felt he needed to be the one to finish it, to see his vision through.
And visually, Jedi is spectacular. The speeder bike chase, the space battle above the Death Star, it pushed the limits of what was possible.
And emotionally, it delivers too. We see Luke's journey come to a head, that confrontation with Vader, his father's redemption, and of course, the rebels winning.
It's a satisfying ending to a trilogy that captivated the world. Star Wars became a phenomenon, a story that's going to be around for a long, long time.
And it went even further. Lucas eventually gave us the prequels, which explored how it all began, and then the sequels, continuing the story with a new generation.
It all started with one film, with Lucas's love for those old adventure serials. Who knew it would turn into all this?
It was a spark of imagination, a willingness to take a risk, to create something different, and as we've seen, it was a wild ride to get there, full of ups and downs, lucky breaks, and pure talent.
It shows us that even the biggest, most iconic things start small, with a bit of chaos, a lot of hard work. It's inspiring. It makes you want to chase your own crazy ideas.
Absolutely. Never give up on the stories you believe in.
Because that's the magic of Star Wars, isn't it? It reminds us of the power of hope, even in the darkest times.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And with that, we wrap up our deep dive into the creation of this amazing saga. May the Force be with you, always.